Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Live Life with Sean. I'm your host, Sean Higgins. I'm a lifelong information security technology expert with a passion for speaking, coaching, and writing. In this podcast, I'm going to introduce you to a question and give you my thoughts around that question. And I'm hoping that my thoughts about that question will lead you to think about your answers. And at the end of every episode, I'm going to try and offer you a tool to help you work through what might be coming up for you. This show is recorded live, and you're invited to add your questions to the discussion. If I don't get to your questions during the show, I'll do my best to answer them in my blog or on a future show. If you enjoy this content, please share it, subscribe to it, like it, and or leave a comment or question, as this will help others find this podcast. Thank you for joining me, and let's get started tonight. Tonight, the question that I want to pose is, are you whitewashed? And let's just step back for a moment, and what I did is I've been thinking about this question for a week or so, just to really dig into it. And I wanted to come with a way to define it so that you would understand. And I looked for a definition, and the closest definition I could find that really at least starts to scratch the surface is concealing unpleasant facts about someone or something. And I think that kind of fits. It doesn't really fit perfectly, because whitewashed, especially for me as an American, is the male dominance in that society that has whitewashed history to be in his favor. Whew, I hope that fits. And if you really look at the US, it's really a black versus white situation. And, it's interesting. I was listening to a part of a book called My Grandmother's Hands. And the part that I happened to listen to talked about the history of slavery. And the slavery is all about enslaving Black people. And it's awful. And I can't believe that was part of the American history, but it is. And, I think it's still deeply ingrained in the people. Anyway, the history that I learned about slavery is not so much about what happened during slavery itself, it's how we got to slavery. When people came over to New World, there were landowners. White people owned lots of land. And what people did is they paid money to come across, and then they were what were called indentured servants, where they would work for these landowners. And then once they paid off their debt of the travel to get them over here, maybe included their family, they were free to go off and do whatever they wanted. And this system worked for a while. And then the indentured servants banded together against the landowners. And the landowners sat back and said, what can we do? What can we do? And, if you look through history, there are times in history, and not just in the US, where some people do things to get you to start to hate other people. Okay? And what these landowners did is they got together and they said, well, first off, step back. The indentured services, they were Black, they were white, and it was just people coming over. What the landowners did is they got together and they said, you know what, let's try and drive a wedge between these people. Let's make it easy for them to feel superior over a certain group of people. I mean, they could have easily said the Italians or the Irish, or whatever other ethnic group. But what they did is they looked at it and said, let's drive everybody against the Black people. And what they did was they started giving some of the white people some phony leadership roles over some of the Black people. They started giving the white people little chunks of land so they could start working their own land. They were in the group of landowners. They didn't have as much as the other, but they did. And people started to hate the black people. And this eventually turned itself into slavery. And, you know, I think that the US is still feeling those effects of the slavery. And, you know, as I was pondering, this show, what really got me started down this path, was last week's show. I was talking about what it is like to be a white male. And, I think I really danced around a lot of things, and I used a quote about George Washington. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, did you know he was a slave owner?" And that set me in a bit of a tizzy because, George Washington is one of the founding fathers of the United States, the first president. He was one of the main generals to help try to get the United States to break away from England. And yet he was a slave owner. And, my first inclination when that person said that to me was, well, maybe he was a good slave owner. Maybe he treated his slaves well. Maybe he, didn't beat them as much as the other slave owners or whatever. And it's like, I had to stop and give my head a shake and say, really? You're going to talk about good slave owners versus bad slave owners? It's like saying there's such a thing as a good kidnapping. It's against the law. And it made me really wonder about how I really felt about George Washington. It just was very interesting. And, I can't say that I came to a truth about, is it good or is it bad? And because during that time, it was an accepted practice. As awful as it was an accepted practice. And there were a lot of other bad things going on. I'm not trying to justify it or not. I'm just, it's just a hard discussion. But I think there's also a lot of other things that are going on in society today that are more important than worrying about whether George Washington was a slave owner. Maybe someday we'll have a discussion about that and it will matter, but today it may not. I started thinking about other things that came up for me. It was this year. I don't know if anybody you're familiar with the series called The Watchmen. I don't understand the whole background behind The Watchmen, but I remember watching the first show, and at the beginning of the first show was the story of the Black Massacre in Tulsa in 1921. And I'm watching this going on, and I am just sitting beside myself saying, how this couldn't have happened in the United States, especially in the 20s. You've got planes, you've got people just shooting black people. It was just a riot. And I'm like, how could any of that be true? This just got to be made up for the show. I was floored when I looked it up. I said, Black Massacre. And yeah, it was true. I just could not believe it. And, it really wasn't talked about ever. I don't remember hearing about it in history class. I think as I read the history about it, it really wasn't really talked about till the 80s or 90s. And they did reparations back to some of the families of people who were killed, which is interesting because they had tied that thread, into the Watchmen series called Redfordations that were paid to the black people, because the president at the time was Robert Redford. I don't know how that got in there, but anyway, you know, unbelievable that something like that would happen. And as white men, we just whitewashed over it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. A friend of mine also asked me when I was thinking about this topic is, what advantages have I received because I'm a white male? And I like to think I'm a good person. And I would like to say that everything that I have done has been done fairly. But do I really know? I don't know. I grew up in mostly white neighborhoods. Um, when I was thinking back, and I had a couple of black friends when I was in elementary school, and when I went to high school, I think there was maybe one black person in the school. And it was very similar when I went to university. There weren't a lot of, actually, there were probably a fair bit more colored people when I went to university. Um, hmm, yeah, there were. Can't say that I had them as friends. Can't say that I avoided them. Did I have any advantages over them because I was white? I don't know. I'm hoping that I didn't. I know that I try not to make a decision based upon anything about the person other than their skills. And I hope I have made good choices. I can't say that I always have. I can't say that haven't laughed at an off-color joke. And, I hope that I can do better. To try and think about this for a moment, I remember watching the movie Mercy. The movie Mercy is about a black man who was who was arrested, charged, and sent away for the murder of a white woman. And many years later, a black lawyer came down, and this is in the South, came down to fight for his justice. And there were two scenes that were very similar. One when the black man was arrested, and then one when the black lawyer was just driving along. In both cases, they were pulled over by the police. The one that was most disturbing to me, was when the black lawyer got pulled over by the police. And I say that because he's just driving down the road. And these two white cops pull him over. He's trying to be as calm as he can. They ask him to get out of the car. He tries to ask them very politely why he needs to get out of the car, what he's done wrong. And, I tried, and I know I failed miserably, but I tried to put myself into his shoes in that moment. And, first off, what did I do wrong? When I get pulled over by the police, which only happened less than a handful of times, it's usually I know because I'm speeding, but to be in his situation, they pull him out of the car and they get him to stand with his hands on the hood of the car as if he is a criminal. And one of the white cops pulls a gun on him. And as I'm sitting there watching this, there's the fear. I'm feeling fear for my life because the cop's pointing a gun at me. I have no idea why. I am trying to maintain my calmness, because somebody starts raising that possibility that I might get hurt, I can imagine anger starting to build up in me. And as I'm watching this, I know that policeman is just eager for me as a black man to do something so he can just shoot me. Oh, he took a swing at me. I just shot him. He got out of the car, he swung at me. They read it off. I could feel that fear, that anger, powerlessness, that this guy with a gun on me has all the control over me. Just, whew. And then when they're gone, to just kind of how can, man, it would feel so unfair. And to think that people treat other people this way based on the color of their skin. And it's just, just scary to me. And I pray that I don't do that, but I am whitewashed. I grew up as a white male. I probably have inherited some of that subconsciously. I hope not. When I was listening to My Grandmother's Hands, at the end of one of the chapters, one of the questions that the author asked is, what would you do if you went to an event and walked into a room of only black people? What would you do? You've been invited to a wedding. Friend of yours, he's black, says, come on, come to my wedding. You go, great. You're a friend of mine. I want to come support you at your wedding. You walk in, everybody's black. What are you going to do? I would like to hope that I'm man enough to walk in and meet some of those people, to enjoy the evening as if I would at any other wedding. Yeah, that's what I would hope I would do. Would I do that? I can only hope and pray that I would be man enough to just say, hey, more people for me to meet, which is how I feel when I walk into any room. I hopefully just walk in, find somebody and start up a conversation. I just hope I'd be able to do that. One quote that I heard today, that I saw today on Facebook from a friend of mine is, do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. Maya Angelou. And I'm hoping that now I've started to peel back some of these layers here for me, that I can continue to peel them back, continue to look underneath the surface and figure out, what things have I picked up? What things have I done subconsciously that, I probably could have done better? Are there people along the way? And it doesn't have to be black or white, and, it could be anybody, where somebody was put down for some reason that wasn't fair. Will I be willing to stand up for them? Will I be willing to step in and say, hold on, can we do this better? And I really, hope that I can do better. I hope that if you can look at your life and see, are you whitewashed in some way? And it doesn't have to be like the US where it's black versus white. It could be whatever country you're from. Is there any type of that tension where your culture or your race or your religion treats some other race, religion, culture differently, where you believe you are superior just because you're different? Let's take a moment here and let's sit with that feeling. Are there things in your life that you have done that you shouldn't have done? Maybe you should have stepped up and helped somebody out. Maybe you had an offhanded remark to somebody based on their race, color, religion, sexual orientation that you probably shouldn't have said. Are there times like that you know that you probably shouldn't have said that? Just feel into yourself. See if there's some place in your body where, maybe that's stored. Maybe there's a reason for it. Maybe there isn't. Let's feel into that for a moment. Take a deep breath and notice where it is in your body. It can be anywhere. For me, I'm starting to feel a little bit of tightness in my solar plexus, but don't let me influence you. Could be, maybe you get a little tension in your shoulder right now as we're talking about this. Maybe your back's a little stiff. Maybe your calf is tight. I don't know, but just feel whatever it feels like for you is fine. Maybe you're starting to develop a little headache. Whatever it is, let's just take a deep breath in. Close your eyes. And focus your attention wherever you're feeling this tension in your body. Just feel into it. Feel into a time when you did something you probably should have done it differently. What I'd like you to do is to imagine a bubble out in front of you. And in this bubble is a magnet. And what we're going to do is when we turn on this magnet, that magnet is going to take that tension right into the bubble. It'll happen very quickly. So turn on the magnet and feel it just suck all that energy out. Let's shut off that magnet. And let's bring in some golden energy from above. Let's bring that energy in. Let it wash down through your body and let it fill in those areas where you just pulled that energy out of. So let this golden energy make you whole. Breathe. Good job. Now let's bring a second bubble along the right side of that first bubble. And there's a second magnet in this bubble. This magnet will pull your power out of that first bubble. So let's turn on that magnet. And there you go. Shut that magnet off. And now your power is in that second bubble. Let's bring that second bubble back to your physical body and let it integrate with that gold energy flowing through your body. Now take a look at that first bubble out in front of you and just notice what it looks like. Color, texture, smell. Does that bubble of energy have a message for you? Just listen for a moment. Now, whether you get a message or you don't, it's okay. Maybe you'll get a message later. Just imagine you have a pin in your hand and pop that first bubble and let that energy go back to where it belongs. Just keep breathing here. Take a deep breath in. Let it out. Take a deep breath in. And as you let this one out, gently open your eyes. And I'd encourage you to take out a piece of paper and a pen and think about, have you been whitewashed? Think about any times in your past where you may have treated somebody unfairly, where you may have turned a blind eye to a situation where you could have stepped in and helped somebody because they were being treated unfairly by somebody else, or you didn't say anything when somebody was saying something bad about somebody because of their race or sexual orientation, or because they look different than you. And just sit down and write and see what it means to you. Can you do better the next time? I am thankful and grateful for you joining me here tonight on Live Life with Sean. Look, if you'd like a free coaching session from me, just go to my website, SeanCHiggins.com, and find the Connect with Sean link and fill out your information, and we can set up a time to talk. If you've enjoyed this show, please share it, subscribe to it, like it, and/or leave a comment, as this will help others find this podcast. And until next time, have a wonderful week.